Look into my eyes. Look. Listen to them, the children of the night. What sweet music they make. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this week we are doing another movie review. This is Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by legendary filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola, and starring Gary Oldman, Anthony Hopkins, Winona Ryder, and Keanu Reeves. The film was released in 1992. Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? I suppose it was, you know. And I remember I saw the film when it came out in theaters. The very night it came out, I believe. And yeah, I was really into it. I was really looking forward to it. And I really enjoyed it. So we begin the film with the legend of Vlad the Impaler, who Bram Stoker apparently used as influence for his novel, his inspiration for the character of Dracula. So this is a guy that existed in real life, and he was a brutal warrior that killed many, many people and impaled them on huge spikes. So we begin the film and there's a huge battle going on. And apparently he was a warrior for, like, the Catholic Church. So what happens in the battle, you know, he's taking out people left and right, stabbing them with swords, impaling them on the spikes. And by the end of this scene, you see thousands of bodies hanging up, impaled on these huge spikes. And Vlad the Impaler is the only survivor. But apparently, he is married to a young, beautiful woman who happens to look just like Winona Ryder. And apparently they told her that Dracula died in battle. So we see, when Vlad returns, we see her body lying there, the body of his young, beautiful wife. And he just flips out, and he finds out that they told her that he was dead. And what she did is she jumped off the top of the castle into the river below and killed herself because she couldn't handle it. And so Vlad the Impaler just completely freaks out, and he's pissed off. He feels so betrayed, and he says, "You know what? I am going to come back from the dead and have my revenge and kill you all," you know. So we see this huge cross, and he like stabs the cross with his sword, and blood goes everywhere. It's obviously a very symbolic scene of it going against the church, you know. And that's what happens. He comes back from the dead as the undead, as a vampire who lives and feasts off the blood of his victims to keep him young. And so we revisit the film many years later, you know, probably hundreds of years later, but it's still in like the 1800s, so. And we meet this young man, Jonathan Harker, who is supposed to be doing some business with Count Dracula, who lives in a big castle up in the hills of Transylvania. And he's been sent to, you know, deliver a casket with the soil, you know. And that's what Dracula uses when he goes to sleep at night, and because he can't be around during the daylight, because obviously the sun would burn him up and turn him into ash. So he has to lie in the coffin in his native soil, and that's what Jonathan Harker is sent there to do and set up. So he sets up a meeting with Dracula, and Jonathan Harker goes to visit Dracula in the castle. And, you know, the film hits on a lot of those notes that we saw in the original Universal Dracula with Bela Lugosi from 1931, and we also, many things we saw in the Hammer version of Dracula from 1958, as well as the 1979 version with Frank Langella. So it hits on a lot of those same notes, but it brings its own flavor as well, with things like telling the story of Vlad the Impaler, and this one has a lot more romance, I would say, than any of those previous versions. It's got more romance, it's got more violence, more blood, more nudity, more sex. It's got more of everything. More special effects, really lavish set designs. And you can tell this was a big budget movie. They had a lot of money to work with here, and they used it to the utmost. Sometimes I think to the detriment of the film. At times I think it's a little over the top with the fancy set designs, and it almost feels like too Hollywood at times, I feel. And that's what I think hurts the film, because I thought this could have been a great film. And it is very good, but I think that kind of hurts a little bit that they went too Hollywood with it. It's too kind of commercial at times. It's almost like a music video or something, you know. But there's no questioning the excellent performance of Gary Oldman as Dracula. He definitely takes some of the flavor that Bela Lugosi had. He has that deep, accent, very similar to the way Bela Lugosi portrayed the character of Dracula. And there's lots of nods to that, and he uses some of the same lines, like I just did at the opening here. And there's a couple wonderful scenes, like like there's one scene where Jonathan Harker is held captive by these 3 vampires. They're like Dracula's brides. These beautiful women, and they're topless, They basically rape him, and they kind of, and they drain his blood and stuff. And when Dracula comes in to, like, try and stop them, he's like freaking out, He's like, no! He's losing his mind. Jonathan Harker's completely losing his mind, and Dracula's kind of standing there, and he's like, and he's got this great, glorious grin, this glorious smile, this great laugh. It's so awesome. I was like, yes, that is Dracula. That is beautiful. So yeah, phenomenal performance by Gary Oldman. He just knocks it out of the park as Dracula. I'd say next to Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee, Gary Oldman is right there, absolutely. And there's been so many iterations of Dracula on film, That is saying a lot, because those first 2 are absolutely phenomenal that I mentioned, and Gary Oldman is just right there with him. But at any rate, we meet Jonathan Harker is supposed to be getting married. He is engaged to this young woman, Mina, and we all know Mina from the legendary story of Dracula. So Mina is played by Winona Ryder. She's beautiful, and we see she looks exactly like the woman from the beginning of the film that Dracula was married to, so that comes into play in this film. So Jonathan Harker is engaged to be married to Mina, and Mina's sister Lucy, who's kind of a wild, she's very flirtatious, she's just beautiful, she's got men crawling all over her, one of them being Cary Elwes, who we know from The Princess Bride and Saw and Robin Hood and stuff like that. And he's typical Cary Elwes in this movie, totally. Brash, young, arrogant, handsome guy. So yeah, she's got men just crawling all over her. But there is one guy that she does fixates on, so she is planning to be married as well, but it doesn't stop her from continuing to flirt with various men. But she falls under the spell of Dracula. Dracula visits her at night. And she falls under the spell of Dracula, and she falls prey to Dracula. So Dracula gets his first taste of blood. And when we first meet Dracula as an older man, after he comes back from the dead, he's an old, decrepit, as you see right here. He's very old, and and very weak, and kind of brittle. But when he gets his first taste of blood from Lucy, Mina's sister, bam, he's transformed into a young, handsome man with long black hair, and and when you first see him as a young man, it's funny, he looks like a pimp daddy with the beautiful gray suit and a top hat and the sunglasses. He looks pimp. And he pimps on Mina. When he first locks eyes on Mina, he sees his wife from thousands of years ago, and he really fixates on her. And it's great because Gary Oldman really uses his charm on her, and he's a very charming, handsome, mysterious guy, and she falls for that. She does respond to it. She tries to play hard to get at first, but she does fall under the spell of Dracula slowly. In the meantime, we meet Professor Van Helsing, and he is investigating the murder of Lucy and what happened to her. Because when we find Lucy's body, she's got the bite marks on her, the mark of the vampire. And he's like, wow, this is very strange. There's something really freaky going on. We got to investigate this. And so he investigates it, and he determines that this wasn't just a man, this was a monster, this was a beast. And yeah, we see this version of Dracula. He is a beast, He can turn into a wolf. We see him as like a full werewolf at one point. First we see him as an actual wolf, the animal. And then at other times we see him, he's like a full-blown werewolf, Like, wow, I didn't know Dracula could do that. We see him as a huge bat, That's awesome when you see him as a huge bat. The makeup job is incredible on those scenes, So yeah, Dracula can take many shapes. He's a shapeshifter. He is a monster. And Van Helsing finds this out, and he is dead set determining on catching the monster, killing his brides and killing him, and stabbing him with a stake through the heart and chopping off his head. And he is bound and determined to do so. And when Mina kind of falls under the spell of Dracula, they see each other here and there, and she starts to fall in love. And it's a real conflict because she knows she's supposed to be marrying Jonathan Harker, who is stuck in the castle, being held captive by the three brides of Dracula, these gorgeous women that are crazy seductive. And yeah, we see a lot of sex stuff, there's a lot of nudity, so this movie's not afraid to go there with the sexuality and the romance, and the nudity, Like I said, this movie has more blood, more violence, more romance, more sex, so it's just like a candy shop of an experience. That's what this is. This is an experience. It's a lot more over the top in a lot of ways than a lot of the past Draculas were. Because this one has a big budget, and you got a guy directing it who's a very rich, and he's a very accomplished director like Francis Ford Coppola. They weren't just giving it to some unknown guy who's not established. This is a guy that directed Godfather, Godfather 2, and masterpieces, So, when you give a guy like that the reins of something like Dracula, you're going to get something, huge. And that's what this is. This is a huge movie with a huge budget, but you have a fantastic cast. You got excellent performances by Gary Oldman, Winona Ryder is fantastic. She's sexy, she's beautiful, and you can't take your eyes off her. And you got, the only one I would say is kind of weaker is Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker. He doesn't really measure up to the other actors in the film. He's kind of like goofy a little bit, and his accent, his English accent isn't quite there, you know. Kind of was miscast. And I do like Keanu Reeves in several films, you know, but when he was younger, he was still kind of learning his craft. He just didn't quite have it in this film. I didn't think he was the right choice for Jonathan Harker in this film. But it doesn't really hurt the film too much. You don't really notice it much. But at any rate, I love this retelling of Dracula's story. Like I said, I just think it's a little too over the top. It's a little too epic at times, you know. A little too big for its own good. There's one scene where it's just Mina sitting in a room, but there's this lavish set design. I'm like, she's just sitting in a room. Why? And I got all this eye candy going on. It's like, why? I just felt like it wasn't needed sometimes. Like, they could have made it a little more basic and down to earth. But there's no question about the excellent performances of Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder and Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing is a little wacky and over the top at times, but he's a lot of fun. You can tell he just had a blast filming this movie, and he just eats it up. He chews up the scenery. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. It's not like Silence of the Lambs era intensity, but it's just great. You can just tell he runs with it, you know, and he has a great time with it. At one point, Winona Ryder, as Mina, seduces Van Helsing, and it's like, and he goes crazy and wild with it. You're like, wow, look at the old man go. Getting it on with young Winona Ryder. How about that? So eventually Mina does fall prey to Dracula, and she does get bit by Dracula, and she sucks the blood of Dracula, and it looks like she's going to become his new bride. But of course Van Helsing is there to put an end and put a stop to this madness once and for all. That's his mission, and he's bound and determined to do so. So this is a fantastic film. Like I said, I just got a few little nitpicks about it, but overall the movie is fantastic. So I highly recommend Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Winona Ryder, Gary Oldman, Keanu Reeves, and Anthony Hopkins. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.